Hi there, this is John for kp5.com, and this is part of a series where we're looking at some advanced PHP topics, and right now we're in the middle of developing an MVC framework. So in the last video we implemented an interface called iController with a public function called dispatch. We created two controller classes, one called test controller and one called index controller. And we did a bit of splitting of URLs in order to facilitate the creation of different controller objects and then dispatching them here at the bottom here on line 35. So with that in place, now we're going to look at how we can separate out the rendering of a page from its logic. And to do that, I'm going to start by going back to the file system and creating another folder. And we've got a folder for controllers, we've got a folder for models, but we're missing a folder for views. So I'm going to create a folder called views, and inside that folder I'm going to create a folder called index, and I'm going to create a folder called test. So the test folder here corresponds with the test controller. And the index folder here corresponds with the index controller. So let's start with the index controller. In my views here, under index, I'm going to create a new file, and it's going to be called welcome.php. I'm going to create a new file here. Let's try and make some reasonably bare bones HTML. Of course, we would probably want to have a doc type and all that other business. We would want to have a head. And then, welcome to my killer PHP application. And maybe we'd have a paragraph type, and we'd have welcome.php. We'll hit save. And in my views, I'm going to create welcome.php. So the idea here is that if I go to index/welcome, I want it to take me to this welcome.php file. I want it to dispatch that particular page, render it out, and then we're good to go. So in order to do that, let's go to our index controller. Now currently in my index controller, I'm not doing very much dispatching. I basically just echo the URI that was sent to me, or part of the URI that was sent to me. That's not very interesting. What I'd rather like to do, or what I'd rather do, is actually use the magic method or the dynamic method calling that we did in the last videos to call a certain part of that URI. So when I say I'm dispatching index/welcome, what would be great is if I could just take this welcome here and pass that in and use that as part of my my controller. So let's see if we can change our architecture just a little bit here. So instead of just passing in the URI as a string here, let's say we pass it in as a series of parameters that we've already split up. So instead of just doing a preg split here and then using the URI split and then taking the first indice, I'm going to try and do something a little nicer. We're going to use the list function, and we're going to define a prefix. Then we're going to have the controller name. Then we're going to have the action name. And then we're going to make that equal preg split. And instead of doing the string to lower method here, we'll take that and we'll just apply that function to our URI. So I'll just put the string to lower here. And then the switch statement, instead of it being on the first indice, which doesn't really mean much, we'll just do a switch on the controller name. And lastly, in my dispatch, I'm going to pass in an array. Actually, let's see if we can be a little more intelligent here. We'll use the knowledge that we developed with or what we learned with the model abstract, and we'll create a controller abstract. And the controller abstract will take in the controller name and the action name. So we'll pass in the controller name and the action name. Now, a lot of PHP frameworks, like Cake and Symfony and the Zen framework, they do this, but they do this with a lot more architecture. There's a lot more classes involved, and there's a whole bunch of different dispatch objects that run, and you can create plugins and so on and so forth. But when you get down to it, it basically does something like this. So I'm going to pass in the controller name and the action name. Now when I refresh this, of course doesn't have, these constructors don't exist yet. So we have to implement them. So I'm going to go back to my index controller here. And we're saying that we're implementing iController, but we can also extend, we can have a controller abstract class that implements the interface. So instead here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say index controller extends controller abstract. And I'm going to hit save, create a new file. We're going to open up a PHP tag. We're going to have to specify the namespace that we're using. In this case, it's going to be com killer PHP controllers. And then the abstract class is going to be called controller abstract. And it's going to have a public function, which is a constructor. And the constructor is going to take in the controller and the action. And then what we'll do is we'll set those protected properties. And lastly, I want controller abstract to implement iController. We'll hit save, and I'm going to put this class in the controllers folder. So far so good, nothing has happened, which is a good sign. And I'm going to do the same thing for test controller. So instead of implements iController, test controller will now extend controller abstract. A little more architecture here, but what this means is that in dispatch, instead of just saying I'm dispatching index welcome, I can say I'm dispatching this action. And I'll get I'm dispatching welcome, which is perfect. So now that I have the action name, I can actually create a public function for the various actions that I want to call. So I can have a default action, and I can have a welcome action. And here what I can do is I can check to see if the method exists in this class, and we'll pass in and we'll check to see this action, and we'll concatenate that with action. So we're just checking to see if that function exists, and if it does exist, then let's open this up. We'll just say action equals this action, and then we'll fire this. Actually, we'll fire this method. So we don't exactly know, the index controller doesn't know which function is going to run, but if it exists, it's going to run it based on whatever the dispatch asks it to do. Now, what's neat about this code is that this public function dispatch no longer relies on the URI anymore. And also, it's generic enough that we can actually put it in the parent class, controller abstract. So I'm going to select this code here, cut it, and move it into controller abstract. And then here in my test controller, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. Now, in controller abstract, if the method doesn't exist, I'm going to throw a new exception saying, please implement a function called method. Actually, we have to, let's clean this up a bit. So our method is going to be the action plus the word action. This is inspired from Zend. The Zend framework does something very similar, but it's far more complex. So we're going to throw a new exception saying, please implement a function called method, whatever the method is. Actually, we can just put that in the string. So let's see what happens. So now we're getting declaration of COM, killers, killer PHP, controller abstract, dispatch must be compatible with that of the iController. So now we've changed the method definition. So we need to go to iController, and now our dispatch function no longer accepts a variable parameter. So we'll refresh this, and we're not getting anything right now. Let's see what's going on. Okay, so now we no longer need to dispatch and supply the URI because our constructor is doing that for us over here. So if I refresh this, I'm getting nothing, which is a good sign, believe it or not. If I do index slash and then I put in some junk, it'll say, exception, please implement a function called action. However, if I do index slash default, I don't get anything. And if I do index slash welcome, I don't get anything. And the reason is because when I go welcome, it automatically runs this public function for welcome action, which is great. So far, everything is kind of working. So now we can create separate functions to load different parts or different views in our application. Now, a couple moments ago, I created a welcome.php file. And in the welcome.php file, I had stuff that was specific to the welcome action. We're going to use that to basically only be loaded. We're going to use this welcome.php file, but only when we are in the welcome action. And this way, our controller is controlling which views are being loaded. And this is all done dynamically, which is neat. We can create all sorts of controllers, and we're going to have these clean URLs, and it's going to be nice and easy to use. And you'll notice we don't have any require once statements. We're loading all of this stuff on the fly. It's really nice. So the first thing we need is we need a view path. So there's a couple things that we're going to need to make this thing possible. First thing is we're going to need a folder where we're storing all of our views. Now this is an excellent kind of variable that the controller abstract class can implement, because it's going to be something that all of the classes are going to need. So in the controller abstract class, I'm going to create a new function called get view folder. Now what get view folder is going to do is it's going to return the application. Actually, it's not going to return the application path. We'll deal with that a little separately. It'll return views, and then it'll concatenate that with the controller, and that should be it. Now, if I go back to my index, actually that's good. Okay, so we have the view folder. If I go back to my index controller, in the welcome here, we want to be able to get this view folder, and we want to load the right PHP file. So I want to echo this get view folder. Let's see what's happening. Okay, we're not getting anything right now. Oh, controller is not a variable. We need this controller. And I'm still not getting anything. Public function get view folder. Ah. There we go. Okay, when we dispatch, I should have caught this a little sooner. We can't just put, the $sign in the method. We actually have to put the to the open bracket and the close bracket, or else you're not going to dispatch anything. So that was my mistake there. Okay, let's go back to our index controller here. If I echo this get view folder, then I get views/index, which is great. If I run echo this get view folder in the test controller, let's say I create a public function called testing action, and I run the same method in test/testing, then I'll get views/test. I think you can see where this is going. So in my controller abstract class, instead of just doing views and then this controller, I'm also going to include the application path. So we'll concatenate that as well. So now we're getting users, John, sites, views, killer PHP, views, test. So far this is starting to appear very close to what our application is looking for. The only thing is that we don't want killer PHP, we want actually whatever's in our namespace. Now, there's a constant that we can use which will give us the namespace that we are sitting in, and that is accessible by doing __namespace __. If we concatenate that, then we'll get killer PHP, and then let me just get rid of the application path for a second there. Okay, we'll get com/killer PHP /controllers. Now we don't want the controllers, we want the views. So we just need to go one folder up in our structure to go from controllers to views. So this is pretty straightforward. We just need to do a string replace anything with the backslash with a /, just like we did with auto loading. And then instead of concatenating that with /views, we can concatenate it with /views, but we can go up one directory by doing the ... So now we're going com killer PHP controllers, and then we go back a directory by doing the ... and then we go into views and then test. So now we just need to concatenate that with the application path, and then we'll get, we still need a / here. Okay. So now we're getting users, John, sites, killer PHP, com, killer PHP, controllers, views, test. And if I go to index/welcome, then I get views/index, which is perfect. So we're going into the index folder for that particular action. Now, in my index controller, instead of just saying get view folder, I'm going to finish this tutorial off by echoing or doing an include once on this get view folder and concatenating that with this action and then concatenating that with .php. All right. Oh, I need a /. And there we go. So we found a very dynamic way of actually rendering our page. With just this one line, we can render our page. And what's neat about this is that we can also push this back into our controller abstract class. So I'm going to take this include once, and I'm going to create a public function called render, and it's just going to include this get view folder and then this action, And then if we want to render a page, it's just a matter of writing this very simple, this render. And if I want to render default, it'll just be a matter of creating a new PHP file. So I'll just select all, copy, paste, and here I'll write I'm in the default action of index controller. Save this in my views under index default.php. Hit save. Refresh this again. If I go to default, then it'll load a different PHP file. So this is a really great and simple to use way of building up some structure in your application for your controllers and your views to easily interact with each other. In the next video, we're going to be looking at anonymous functions to create callbacks, and how we can extend this further by introducing session and state and using our models to persist data across forms. Thanks for listening.